I had always believed cooking was one of those skills you magically unlocked when you really needed it, like confidence or emotional maturity. Until that day, my relationship with the kitchen was simple and peaceful because it didn't exist. My meals came in boxes, wrappers, or bags, handed over by tired delivery drivers who knew my address better than my relatives. Still, when my crush casually mentioned she loved home-cooked food, my brain immediately made a dangerous decision on my behalf. I would cook for her. Her name was Sarah, and she had that effortless kind of charm that made ordinary conversations feel important. We worked in the same building, but different departments, which meant just enough distance to stay mysterious and just enough proximity to overthink every interaction. One evening, while we were talking about weekend plans, she joked about how people these days couldn't survive without food apps. I laughed a little too hard and said something that changed my destiny. I told her I actually enjoyed cooking. The lie left my mouth smoothly, confidently, without hesitation. She smiled and said she'd love to try something I made someday. That was the moment panic quietly moved in and unpacked its bags. I nodded, smiled back, and agreed, all while my inner voice screamed that I had never cooked anything beyond instant noodles without supervision. But backing out wasn't an option anymore. Pride, hope, and stupidity had joined forces. I invited her over for dinner that weekend, assuring her it would be simple and homemade. She agreed, and just like that, I had 48 hours to transform into a person I wasn't. The planning stage gave me false confidence. I watched cooking videos at double speed, convincing myself that chopping onions was mostly about attitude. I Googled easy, impressive dinner recipes and ignored anything that used words like simmer, marinade, or preheat for 30 minutes. I settled on pasta because it felt safe, international, and romantic. Pasta was basically boiled confidence with sauce, right? I made a shopping list that included items I had never purchased before, but spelled confidently anyway. The grocery store was my first reality check. I stood in front of shelves full of sauces, completely frozen, realizing I didn't know the difference between marinara and arabaya. I picked one based on packaging aesthetics and hoped for the best. I bought garlic because every video aggressively emphasized garlic, even though I wasn't sure how much was too much. The cashier scanned my items while I imagined myself explaining the dish to Sarah like I knew what I was doing. Back home, I cleaned my apartment like my life depended on it. The kitchen, however, betrayed me immediately. I owned exactly one pan that had seen better days, and a pot that whistled ominously when heated. Still, I laid everything out neatly, put on music, and tried to channel calm energy. Cooking, I told myself, was just following instructions. Then I turned on the stove. Things started going wrong quietly at first. The garlic burned faster than expected, filling the apartment with a smell that was less romantic and more concerning. I added oil to compensate, which only created smoke. I opened a window and told myself this was normal, that chefs probably dealt with this all the time. The pasta water boiled over because I forgot salt, but remembered it too late. I cleaned the mess with one hand while stirring sauce with the other, feeling like I was fighting an invisible enemy. By the time Sarah texted that she was on her way, my confidence was hanging by a thread. The sauce tasted strange, not terrible, but not impressive either. I added spices randomly, trusting my instincts, which was my second mistake. The kitchen looked like a crime scene, and I was sweating through my shirt. I told myself it would come together at the last moment, because movies had taught me that chaos always resolves into beauty. Sarah arrived exactly on time, smiling, carrying a small dessert. I greeted her with forced calm, hoping she wouldn't notice the faint smell of smoke still lingering. She complimented the apartment, and I rushed her to the living room, insisting she relax while I finished cooking. In reality, I needed to hide the disaster unfolding in the kitchen. As she sat on the couch, I returned to the stove and tasted the sauce again. It was worse. Somewhere between panic and denial, I realized I had no idea how to fix it. The pasta was overcooked, the sauce was confused, and my confidence had officially evaporated. My phone buzzed with a food delivery notification from earlier browsing, mocking me silently. I stood there, staring at the pot, understanding that my dream of impressing her with culinary skills was collapsing in real time. The question was no longer whether the food was good, but whether I could recover without revealing the lie that started it all. And that's when I did the unthinkable. I opened a delivery app and ordered pizza. The moment I placed the pizza order, a strange calm washed over me, the kind that comes right after making a terrible but necessary decision. The app truthfully confirmed my order and gave me an estimated delivery time of 25 minutes, which suddenly felt like an eternity and a miracle at the same time. I stared at the screen, then at the ruined pasta, and accepted that there was no going back. The kitchen was no longer a place of ambition. It was now a crime scene that needed to be hidden. I quickly turned off the stove and moved the pot out of sight like it might confess if Sarah saw it. I sprayed air freshener aggressively, creating a confusing mix of burnt garlic and artificial lavender. Then I washed my hands, fixed my hair, and practiced a calm face in the mirror, the kind that said everything was going according to plan. When I returned to the living room, Sarah was scrolling on her phone, relaxed and smiling, completely unaware that my culinary dreams had already died. We started talking, and for a few minutes things felt normal again. She told me about her week, her coworkers, small stories that made her laugh softly. I nodded, responded, and laughed at the right moments, but my mind was counting seconds. Every sound from outside made my heart jump, convinced it was the delivery rider arriving too early or too late. I realized that lying about cooking had now evolved into managing the lie without making it worse. Eventually, she asked the question I had been dreading. She leaned back on the couch and casually asked what I was making. My brain froze, then quickly assembled a vague answer. I said pasta, something simple but comforting, hoping the lack of detail wouldn't raise suspicion. She smiled and said she loved pasta, which felt like the universe personally mocking me. I nodded confidently while internally apologizing to every Italian ancestor. The doorbell finally rang, louder than it needed to be. Panic shot through me, but relief followed immediately. I stood up a little too fast and said I'd get it. When I opened the door and saw the pizza box, I felt both defeated and grateful. The delivery guy handed it over without judgment, unaware that he had just saved my evening. I thanked him and closed the door, holding the box like it was evidence. Walking back into the living room was the hardest part. Sarah looked at the box, then at me, clearly surprised. I hesitated for a split second, then decided that partial honesty was safer than a complete lie. I laughed awkwardly and admitted that my cooking attempt had gone wrong and that I didn't want to risk serving her something terrible. For a moment, I waited for disappointment. Instead, she laughed, not politely, but genuinely. She said she appreciated the honesty and joked that ordering pizza was a solid backup plan. The tension I'd been carrying melted instantly. We sat on the floor, opened the box, and ate slices straight from it, talking freely now that the pressure was gone. As we ate, she told me she cared more about effort than perfection, and that trying mattered more than success. Her words hit harder than any compliment could have. I realized that my biggest mistake hadn't been burning garlic or overcooking pasta. It had been pretending to be someone I wasn't. The night shifted from a performance into something real, something comfortable. By the time we finished eating, the pizza boxes empty and laughter filling the room, I knew this evening wasn't a failure anymore. It had simply taken an unexpected turn. And somewhere between greasy fingers and honest conversation, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, this disaster had worked in my favor. After dinner, the atmosphere felt lighter than I ever expected it to. The pressure I had built in my head completely disappeared, replaced by something calm and real. We moved from the floor to the couch, still laughing about my failed attempt at being a chef. She teased me about how confident I had sounded when I invited her, and I admitted that confidence was mostly fear wearing a nice outfit. Instead of judging me, she found it funny, even relatable, and that made me relax even more. At some point, she asked to see the kitchen, and there was no point in saying no. I showed her the disaster honestly. The burnt pan, the abandoned pot of pasta, the spices thrown together without logic. She shook her head, smiling, and said it looked like effort, not incompetence. That sentence stayed with me because no one had ever framed failure that way before. We spent the rest of the evening talking about random things, childhood memories, embarrassing moments, and small dreams. Without trying to impress her, I felt more confident than I had all night. I realized that pretending to be perfect had almost ruined something that honesty had saved. When she finally got up to leave, she thanked me for dinner, pizza included, and said she'd like to come over again. Maybe next time we could cook together. After she left, I sat alone on the couch, surrounded by empty pizza boxes and a messy kitchen, but smiling like an idiot. The night hadn't gone according to plan, but it had gone better than expected. I learned that trying too hard to impress someone often does the opposite, while being honest creates space for real connection. I never did become a great cook overnight, but I did learn something more important. You don't win someone over with perfection. You win them over by being real. And sometimes the pizza you ordered to cover a mistake ends up being the best part of the night.
After that second meeting, the incident stopped feeling like an accident and started feeling like a thread quietly weaving itself back into my life. We didn't exchange numbers that day, but we began running into each other more often than logic could explain. At the same grocery store, near the same bus stop, passing each other on the same street at different times. Every encounter came with a shared smile, a quick joke about personal space, and the unspoken acknowledgement that we were now part of each other's stories, whether we planned to be or not. What surprised me most was how natural it all felt. The initial embarrassment had burned away any need to pretend. I didn't worry about saying the right thing or appearing interesting. They already knew me at my most impulsive and awkward. There was freedom in that. Conversations flowed easily, unfiltered and honest, like two people who had skipped the early formal stages of knowing each other. One evening, we finally stopped pretending these meetings were coincidences. We sat on a bench and talked longer than usual about boundaries, instincts, and how strange it is that comfort can arrive before permission. They admitted the hug had startled them, but also made them laugh later because of how genuine it felt. Hearing that eased something deep in my chest. What I had seen as a pure mistake hadn't landed as harm. As we said goodbye that night, there was no awkwardness left, only familiarity. I walked away realizing the hug no longer embarrassed me the way it once had. It had become a shared origin point, the moment everything started without intention. I didn't know where this connection would lead, but I knew one thing clearly. That accidental hug had changed the shape of an ordinary day, and maybe, quietly, the direction of 2 lives. After that night on the bench, something settled between us that didn't need naming. We still hadn't labeled what we were to each other, but our routines slowly began to bend in similar directions. Coffee at the same time, walks that overlapped, messages exchanged with an ease that suggested we'd known each other longer than we actually had. The hug stopped being the center of the story and became the foundation beneath it, invisible but always there. What struck me most was how safe everything felt. Not dramatic, not intense, just steady. We talked about past embarrassments, missed chances, and the strange moments that redirect lives without asking permission. They joked that if I hadn't hugged them, we might have passed each other 100 times without ever speaking. That thought lingered with me. How many connections do we miss because we hesitate 1 second longer than instinct allows? There were moments when I replayed that first hug in my mind, not with shame anymore, but curiosity. What if I had stopped myself? What if I had looked closer? None of this would exist. That realization softened my relationship with mistakes. Some errors don't need undoing. Some only need time to show their purpose. One evening, as we stood saying goodbye, there was a pause that felt familiar and new at the same time. No confusion, no panic, just presence. They smiled and opened their arms slightly, waiting. This time, I stepped in deliberately. The hug was lighter, slower, mutual. No accident at all. And in that moment, I understood that what began as the most awkward mistake of my life had quietly become one of its most meaningful turns.
By the 7th part of the story, I had fully accepted that Milo was not just a pet, but a personality with rules I would never completely master. What surprised me was how naturally those rules began to influence my behavior outside the apartment. I became more patient in conversations, more aware of unspoken boundaries, and less reactive when attention wasn't immediately returned. Somewhere between respecting a cat's space and earning it back, I had learned to slow down. Milo, of course, remained blissfully unaware of the personal growth he had triggered. He continued his routines with quiet confidence, choosing moments of closeness with precision. When he wanted affection, he demanded it boldly, climbing onto my lap or headbutting my hand until I responded. When he didn't, he simply existed nearby, reminding me that presence alone could be enough. That balance felt healthier than constant validation ever could. One afternoon, I realized something small but symbolic. I had sat down on the couch, leaving his blanket untouched without even thinking about it. Respect had become automatic. Milo noticed, too. He hopped up, circled once, and settled beside me, his tail flicking lazily, as if approving my continued education. I smiled, understanding that trust, once repaired properly, doesn't need constant reassurance. The cold shoulder that once felt like rejection now felt like a quiet initiation. Milo had taught me how to listen without words, and how to value affection because it was chosen, not guaranteed. As he slept beside me, completely at ease, I understood that this wasn't just a story about a cat ignoring me. It was about learning that the strongest bonds are built on patience, awareness, and the humility to accept that love is always given on its own terms. By this point, life with Milo had settled into a rhythm that felt more intentional than ever before. The apartment felt calmer, not because anything physical had changed, but because I had changed how I moved through it. I no longer assumed access to his affection or space. I waited, observed, and responded instead of acting first. It was strange how such a small shift created such a big difference in how peaceful everything felt. Milo seemed to thrive in this new balance. He followed me from room to room again, not closely, not clingy, but present. When I worked, he sat nearby. When I rested, he chose a spot within sight. His presence became steady rather than conditional, and that consistency felt like trust in its purest form. I realized then that trust doesn't announce itself loudly. It shows up quietly and stays. There were moments when he tested me, stopping short of my reach, watching to